I've entitled this talk Uniquely Made, because we are all uniquely made. And we heard the culmination of a lot of things in that passage, and I can't unpack them all because we'd be here for a very long time. But I kind of just want to use it as almost like a sounding board into something else. And I wonder for each of you if you can really pinpoint a time in your life, maybe in your spiritual life, something that really significant happened and you thought, that's definitely of the Lord. And in that moment, you sensed a shift. It might be when you first came to faith. It might be just a significant moment that you can say, I know that for me, everything changed. And I think kind of looking back on my life, I became a Christian when I was about 21. I didn't come from a Christian family. And actually my faith kind of just jogged along a little bit, really. It wasn't particularly deep. It was a little bit all over the place sometimes, kind of like went with the wind. But something significant happened in my life that was really difficult around the loss of my father. And it brought me to a place of just a real deep sense of loss and grief. And in my slightly tenuous faith, I lost my way. I did keep going to church because I had small children and I didn't want to affect them. But actually, I was really quite thrown. But something happened, and I won't go into great details now because there's not time, maybe another time. But Jesus literally felt like he pulled me back by the scruff of my neck. And in that moment, I knew that I would never be the same again. I used to be somebody who was very happy sitting at the back, actually really very comfortable sitting at the back. And the thought of me standing at the front, sharing and preaching really was not on my radar at all. So I can only say that I am standing here because of God, because I would never have chosen it for myself. So I wonder for Peter, in that moment, in that story, that he realizes that despite everything that has happened, that this moment, this breakfast with Jesus, this realization was really pivotal in his life, his launch pad really, to all that he'd been prepared for, whether he knew it or not. But we know from the stories that we read of Peter that he didn't always get it right. I don't know whether you've ever seen films that you kind of, or like dramas where you see the opening scene and you think, I haven't got a clue what's going on. And then something comes along the screen and says, present day. And then the next thing is 10 years earlier or a week earlier. And then they backtrack and you end up with the present day. So I kind of want to do that a little bit this morning with Peter. I kind of want to just gather his story. There's not enough time, but just some significant things that kind of popped out to me as I was thinking about him. So his calling, when Jesus called him, he saw him in John 1:42. It says, Jesus looked at him, Simon, he was called then, and said, you are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas, which when translated is Peter. So we know that Peter and Cephas means rock. So in that moment when Jesus first saw Peter, he knew everything about him. He knew what was going to be happening in Peter's life in years to come. He saw his heart, he saw his potential, He knew Peter's future. Jesus could see beyond Peter's humanity. And for each of us, even before we make that decision, that first encounter with Jesus, he sees our potential. He sees our heart. In Psalm 139, beautiful, beautiful psalm, but I just want to read verses 13 to 16. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for you are wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before they came to be. So God knows everything. He knows our highs and our lows. He knows our successes and failures. He knows our hurts and pain. And he knows the deepest desires of our heart. And he wants to elevate us. I wonder how that makes you feel. That initial calling of your name, just like he called Peter. So the next kind of little snippet I want to pick up is when Jesus walks on the water in Matthew 14, verses 25 to 32. So this is after the feeding of the 5,000, and Jesus sends the disciples across the lake. And it's nighttime, because scary things happen at night, don't they? During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink and cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You are of little faith," he said. "Why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. So it's Jesus encouraging Peter to step out, to be courageous. But Peter takes his eye off Jesus and looks at the wind and looks at the waves. And he begins to sink and he begins to panic. But Jesus is right there, and he doesn't send him back to the boat on his own. He guides him back with him. There's a gentle nudge from Peter about Peter's unplanned swim. He doesn't condemn him. He doesn't humiliate him. But he takes him back to safety. And in those moments where we falter and sink, he's not going to belittle us. He's not going to say, "Well, you're on your own now." He doesn't give up on us. He gently dries us off, puts us back on dry land, and we know that he will be there if we want to step out again. And it might be that there's been times when you felt really brave, really courageous, and it's all gone wrong. And you've wondered, what on earth happened there? But Jesus wants you to know that he was there. And it might not have ended up as you'd hoped it would. but he will be there in the water and on the land. So we continue with Peter's journey with Jesus, all the things that he's gathering. And I want to head on to Jesus' transfiguration, which if you want to read that, that's in Luke 9. So 8 days before this happened, the disciples were asked by Jesus who they thought he was. And it's Peter that says, "You are the Christ. You are the Messiah." He knows who Jesus is. And he knows the poignancy of this and the significance. And then 8 days later, he goes up the mountain with Jesus and John and James, and suddenly before him, Jesus is completely transformed. He is changed from his earthly appearance to his heavenly appearance. I don't know about you, but I'd be terrified as well, as the disciples were. And I kind of find it really interesting that Peter, in that moment, my sense is that he feels like he needs to do something. I can't just watch this. I need to do something. So he rushes around and suggests building shelters for Jesus and Moses and Elijah. And I wonder what that was about for him. Was it that he wanted to keep that moment? Was it that he didn't know what to do, so he felt like he needed to do something? And so actually he was busy and he was running around and thinking about doing something else. But actually what had happened in that moment, he kind of missed it. He almost missed the opportunity. And I don't know whether that's something that strikes us, is that how often we're trying to do something and we miss the opportunity, or it feels like we've missed the opportunity. I find it quite fascinating when I watch certain things on TV, significant public events like we've had, the coronation and the Queen's funeral and all sorts of things recently over the last year. And I find it fascinating when you see big crowds of people and what they're looking at actually is a mobile phone, rather than taking in and absorbing the most, amazing event that they possibly could. And it kind of fascinates me, and I know that I'm tempted to do that as well sometimes. And I was reminded that, kind of made me laugh when I thought about it, that a few years ago my daughter graduated at Winchester University, and Dame Judi Dench also received an honorary doctorate. So Bethany says that she graduated with Judi Dench, which is not completely true. And I could see her walking round the cathedral, and I thought, she's going to come past me. So I'm kind of getting my phone, and I managed to get a photo. I missed her. And actually, I've just got this blurry mess going through. So I have got a photo of Judi Dench, but you couldn't tell it is her. And I missed the opportunity because actually, I was too busy, I was too distracted. And then last year, we were really very blessed, and we got Wimbledon centre court tickets. And we were way up the back, right opposite the Royal Box. But we were like way up the back. And I was kind of peering, and I thought, that's the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. And they were right opposite me, but, probably the other side of the garden. But I took a photo, and I sent it to my children. They weren't very impressed at all. They were like, who on earth is that? But we in our kind of excitement sometimes, we try and do things to capture moments and to remember memories, but sometimes the memory needs to stay here in our hearts, doesn't it? And so that, for me, a little bit makes me wonder, for Peter, I'd love to have a chat with Peter sometime, maybe one day, about kind of that missed opportunity. And my sense is that Jesus wants us to be completely present with him in the moment, no distractions. And then we won't miss out, will we? We won't miss the opportunity. So as we kind of head on to the last days of Jesus' life, and it always amazes me actually how things accelerated so quickly in that last week for Jesus. And in the Last Supper and the washing of the disciples' feet. And I think you know what I'm going to say. So Matthew 16, 6 to 10. No, Matthew 13, 6 to 10. Which is not here at all. It is Matthew 16, I think. Can't find it. But we know that, Jesus goes to wash Peter's feet and he's like, "You're not washing my feet." And then Jesus is like, you don't know the significance of what is happening, what this means. And so Peter's like, well, not just my feet, but my whole body instead. Just do everything. And I think he missed that opportunity, didn't he? And Peter's reluctance, due to his misunderstanding, that actually he wants to offer Jesus his whole self, all of him. But in a way, at that time, it just wasn't right. It wasn't appropriate. But he's so desperate to do the right thing, so desperate to show Jesus that he's all in for him. And I wonder for us whether there are moments when we want to do the right thing. We want to jump all in. We want to just be all committed. But actually, it might not be the right time. There might be other work to do. It might not be the right place. And then we move into the conversation that Jesus has with Peter, and he says to him, "You will deny me. You will deny me 3 times. And Peter's like, "Absolutely not. Of course I won't." But we know, don't we? We know what happens. And I kind of wonder, as I was thinking about that, imagining myself in that scene, just thinking about the whole cultural aspect of the day, because it was really violent, whether I could absolutely, with my hand on my heart, say that I wouldn't do that as well. I'd love to say that I wouldn't. But in that moment, in that intensity of the situation, I don't know. I have to confess that over the years, I felt really quite irritated by Peter in that moment. How could he? But I don't know. But what I did notice the other day when I was reading this again, that unlike other friends of Jesus in those awful moments, when Jesus was arrested, Peter was there. He did follow when others didn't. It was from a distance, and he was present. But just in that moment, he couldn't put his hand up. And for a while, I'm pretty sure that completely destroyed him. That sense of shame and condemnation. How could I have done that? So that's just a little flavour of Peter's character, his actions, his desperate desire to serve Jesus wholeheartedly, his all-in attitude, his sometimes completely getting it wrong actions. And now I want to return just to John 21 for a few moments. And as I said at the beginning, there's so much in there, isn't there? But, Jesus had died and he'd appeared to other disciples. And I'm sure they were feeling completely discombobulated. And what do you do when you're feeling discombobulated? You want to do something where you feel that you know what you're doing. that you feel safe and that actually you can do something and not have to think about it. And so I guess for the disciples, they fished because that's what they did. That was what they were familiar with. They went out on the boat and went to fish. But actually, when they'd finished and had, a rubbish night of catching no fish, and they come back to shore, and there's Jesus standing there and says, throw it over the other side. A little bit of deja vu for some of them, I think. And then they get a whole load, don't they? 153. But when they realise that it's Jesus on the beach, it's not a surprise, is it, that who jumps in first? It's Peter, wanting to get there first. And actually, as I thought about that, I wondered whether that whole jumping out of the boat into the water was almost like a baptismal moment for him, where actually he leaves the old behind. He doesn't want to be bothered with all of that stuff. He just wants to go and see Jesus. He wants to enter into something new, where the old dies and the new life is raised up. I actually also wonder whether he was desperate to get to Jesus first so that they could actually iron things out between them without, anybody else witnessing it. I don't know. But actually, as they sit together and have breakfast, there's Jesus with Peter. Do you love me? And he says it 3 times. Was it one for each time of denial? I don't know, but I do know that we read that Peter was hurt, wasn't he, by the questioning. Was Jesus just checking? Did he know already? I expect he did. But actually, it's in that moment, that's his pivotal moment, isn't it? That he is unwittingly being prepared for all that he's been working towards over the years, whether he knew it or not. And just another thing as I kind of draw to a close in a moment, but I guess my sense is that despite all the false starts and the mess-ups that happened with Peter, I don't think Jesus wanted to change fundamentally who he was. He didn't say, oh, Peter, I wish you could be more like John or James. He probably wouldn't say, I wish you could be more like Judas. But, he didn't. He didn't say, I want you to be like somebody else. I want you to be somebody else. He gently rebuked Peter at times, but he didn't try and change his character. He knew that Peter was to be one of the front men for the next season. And I wonder whether Peter, maybe in his insecurity, felt threatened by others. Was he concerned about John? We read a lot about, the disciple that Jesus loved. And in chapter 21, 19 to 23, Jesus says, follow me. Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. Lord, and when Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? And Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. Because of this, the rumor spread among the brothers that this disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? And quite harsh words. But actually, Jesus wanted Peter to be himself. And it might have been in Peter's desire to maybe try and be like somebody else. He was trying to shift things a bit and denying actually who he had been created to be, uniquely made. And I think for us, we can get quite wounded, can't we, if we've been compared to others or made to feel that others are more favoured than us. Jesus doesn't have favourites. We have each been uniquely created by God for his purpose for us. And I think we can waste a lot of time and energy comparing ourselves to others and maybe wishing we were like them. But by doing that, in a way, we're actually denying Jesus in being able to mould us into the people that he desires us to be. In Ephesians 2, verses 8 to 10, it says, "For it is by grace that you have been saved, through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is a gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." Amen.